Well, hey everybody. Today I've had a really interesting couple of days. Yesterday at work, while I was working, I ended up having a conversation with this guy who I asked him how he got into what he does, and he kind of told me how he fell into it through college and whatnot. And as we got to talking, he asked me what I'm majoring in. I told him, I'm getting a master's of religious education. And oh, that was really interesting. His eyes kind of lit up, and we started talking about faith and the story of faith and what draws me to Scripture and what draws me to Jesus and the story of Jesus and his disciples and his followers and the story of Israel and the church as it's grown, and talked about my undergrad work in Christian ministry and in history, and how I try to meld those two together, and how this story is all relevant to us today. And as we started talking, he shared with me, I just started to, I started to assume, hey, he's interested in this, so he must be a Christian. And so I asked, are you a Christian? And he said, no, actually I'm an agnostic. And so I was kind of taken aback for a second. Obviously, I didn't show it on my face, trying not to be surprised by anything that anybody tells me about themselves. But he started to tell me how faith to him wasn't very relevant, and that was the problem that he found with Scripture, which is very odd to be having. It was very odd to be having this conversation where I work, because my work has nothing to do with faith or religion or the story of Christianity or any of that. And so, as we were talking, it was interesting that we didn't get interrupted either. So we kept talking about this, and we talked for about 10-15 minutes, and I shared with him how I thought faith is relevant and why I studied history, because the Bible happened to real people in real space in real time, and this is God interacting with man in time. And so as I read these stories, I find the story of us. I look at the story of David, and I'm like, dude, there are plenty of women who've been married who I've thought, I'd like to get with her if she weren't married. And David didn't think that. He's like, I'd like to get with her, and I don't care if she's married. And let's be honest, there are plenty of people in today's culture who have thought, hey, I don't care that she's married, I'm going to be with her. And in some ways, we even celebrate that in our culture, which is a whole other ball of wax when you think about it. I've read the story of the Israelites and looked at them to see them worship God and then fall away from God, and God punished them. And as I've sat there and thought, they're so stupid, then I look at my life and how I've worshiped God and then walked away from God and then come back to God. And my story is just like the story of the Israelites. That's me in the story. And then there's Paul, where he says, the good I want to do, I don't do that, and the bad things I don't want to do, that's what I keep doing. And I read those words, I'm like, that is me. And then the disciples, having the discussion about who's the greatest in the kingdom. And I often hear people preach and teach, and I think, man, I'm greater than them. If I had been speaking, I would have said it this way, or this could have been more nuanced. Or so I see in Scripture myself. I see this story going on, but I see myself involved in it. Even if my name's not written right there in the text of Scripture, Calvin did this and Calvin did that. As my life unfolds, as God is writing my story, I find what happened in the pages of Scripture, what happened in the Bible, what happened to the Israelites, what happened to Joshua and David and Solomon and the disciples and Paul and Peter and James and all these people in Scripture, what happened to them is happening to me now. That is my story. That's why it's relevant, because Scripture didn't just happen. It didn't just happen. Scripture happens, and our lives unfold, and God is writing the Scripture of our lives. And I don't mean to be blasphemous here. I just can't find a better word for it. So But that brings me to what happened today. I was helping this old guy. His name was John Bailey, and I asked him if I could tell his story, and he said yeah. And he's an old guy. He's in his 60s. He is a cow farmer from Tennessee. He has 800 acres and I think 126 cows. He came in, and I was talking to him yesterday, kind of heard that story, and then he left and he came back today, and I was able to walk him through some things. And as we started talking, he asked me what I was doing, much like the story of the guy yesterday, and told him, hey, I'm majoring in religious education, and that freed him to tell this story. He said, I didn't grow up in church. I've been in church maybe one time in my life, and that was for a funeral. And one day I was driving by this church. I was on my way to get a newspaper, and my truck broke down right in front of the church. And so I thought, hey, I'll go in and I'll listen to whatever's being said. And so he went in, and this young preacher was preaching, and he remembered thinking, hey, I like the way this guy talks, and so maybe I'll come back here next week. And he said, he told me, well, that next week I got kind of busy and I wasn't planning on going. But that next Sunday I decided to go get the paper again. So he went to go get the paper, and his truck, believe it or not, died again right in front of that church. And so call it eerie, I call it providence, I call it divine appointment, I call it Jesus. But he walked into that building, and he listened to that preacher preaching about Jesus, or the parable of the shepherd who leaves the 99 and goes after the one lost sheep. And he told me, I went up and I talked to the pastor afterwards, and I said, that one sheep is me. And so, as he was telling this story, he kind of teared up, and I'm trying to keep from tearing up as I'm saying this story, so that's why I kind of keep pausing here, so I apologize. But I teared up, and we embraced, and we hugged, and we talked for a little bit, and he said, whenever you become a pastor, whenever you get your church, I want to come hear you preach. And I've never had I've had lots of experience where I've had God moments, but 2 days in a row in a place where we don't talk about God or life or anything like that, this guy coming in and telling me his story of being that sheep that Jesus went after, and saying, that's me in the story. And I'm still kind of floored by it. I'm still kind of floored that this guy found himself in the story, I find myself in the story, and the young man that I was talking to said his frustration is that he can't find himself in the story, that it's not relevant. But I do believe we're in the story. I do believe that John's story is an important story to tell. It's as important as Scripture itself, that God still interacts in our life, that God still leaves the 99 and goes after the one. So if you're the lost one, if you're the one sheep that you feel God needs to come after, God's coming. He's on his way. Jesus is running down the mountain towards you now. I don't know what situation you're in. I don't know what you've been through. I don't know if you feel abandoned by God. Just know he's coming down the mountain. You're the one. He's coming after you. He's come after me time and time and time again as I've wandered astray from the fold. He came after John, who'd never been in church except for a funeral, 60 some odd years old, lots of money, lots of time on his hand, living off the land, but far from God, and God ran after him. God ran after him. And he's running after you. And he wants you to be part of the story that he's writing. So those are my thoughts on this. In what way did God come after you? Or in what way do you need God to come after you? What sheep are you? Where are you? Where can God find you? Think on those questions. It's important. It's relevant. God's coming. Look for him. He'll be there soon. Talk to you later.